evening, good afternoon, and good night. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, episode 13, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that's hopefully for somebody. I am your host, Kyle Naranya, here to review the latest blockbuster, the change in the hierarchy of power in the DC Extended Universe, Black Adam. Now, before getting into the film, I will be doing a non-spoiler and spoiler section of the review. So if you do not want to hear spoilers, you will have the opportunity to avoid them and just hear a general review with no plot details, just an overall impression of the film as a whole. That will be it for this episode. It may run a little bit shorter than usual, but that's what we're going to be doing today. Black Adam is the latest blockbuster featuring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, directed by Wam Koyet Sarah, written by Adam Sistikel, Rory Haynes, and Saurabh Nashivani. Obviously based on the villain of the Shazam universe, the titular villain of the Shazam universe. If you're unaware with the character, Black Adam was a prior champion chosen by the wizard Shazam to wield his powers, and safe to say it didn't necessarily end well for Shazam or anybody really. General opinion on the film: unfortunately, I do not think this is going to be changing anything with the hierarchy of power with the DC Extended Universe. The film has a lot of problems at the script level, at the editing level, character choices. I found the film to be quite not problematic, but the script felt as if it was written prior to the resurgence of comic book films with the dawn of something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Not in terms of a comparison of quality of films or even style of what those films are like, but it seems to suffer from problems comic book movies had over a decade ago, and that they were not corrected for a film now, which was certainly interesting. I think The Rock as a whole is a really great anti-hero slash villain. As a fan of the Fast and Furious films, I think that Fast 5 is the best of all of the films. I believe we're at 10 now, soon to be 11 and 12 if you do include Hobbs and Shaw, which obviously if you're asking Dwayne, he would include that. Vin, maybe not so much. But I thoroughly enjoyed The Rock when he played Hobbs as a bad guy or antagonist to Dom and Brian, and seeing that character style or similar performance from The Rock was certainly refreshing, given how he's since then, which was we're a decade plus, because Fast 5 came out in 2011, where he has been the hero. He has not been truly an antagonist in any film in quite a while. So I thoroughly enjoyed getting to see that aspect of The Rock as Black Adam. I think that the film tries to do a lot of different things within the DC Comics universe, but really fails to understand how those work. I can't get into overall specifics without it being a spoiler, but they somehow managed to create a very interesting Dr. Fate / Kent Nelson, while at the same time completely misunderstanding how that character's powers work at all, which was really unfortunate. I think Aldous Hodge as Hawkman was really captivating, and I enjoyed his version of the character. Having grown up with the DC animated universe, which focused more on Hawkgirl, it was great to see the focus put on Carter Hall. And even more recently in the Arrowverse, they still put a focus on Hawkgirl with Shiera, and Carter sort of becomes a backseat passenger to whatever story that is being done at the time, specifically with the DC animated universe and what they did in the first season of Legends of Tomorrow. DC presents Legends of Tomorrow. I think that the action in the film is fine, but ultimately I believe it has too many characters and does not focus on any of them enough to be truly interesting. I think you could have slimmed down the overall cast. The inclusion of Atom Smasher and Cyclone was a complete waste. I don't think that those characters have compelling arcs. I don't necessarily feel that their performances are great. And the comedy, for the most part, I felt was mostly flat in the film as a whole. There are a couple of nice jokes, and there's a good use of music to some degree, but also the score, unfortunately, by Lorne Balfe is quite forgettable. I've enjoyed seeing The Rock as the villain doing villain things. That was quite entertaining and captivating. However, the film suffers, and unfortunately this was noticeable in the marketing material, that it has very familiar sequences and set pieces, which is really unfortunate given the fact that this could have been anything, but seems to rely on too many tropes in comic book films, and ultimately, outside of the fact that the film does focus on a villain, fails to do anything interesting with them. The inclusion of the Justice Society of America is just sort of there. It feels like a producer note that they could not use the Justice League, so they had to use the JSA. It is cool that they chose to use characters such as Dr. Fate and Hawkman, who were members of the Justice Society of America, but then with the whole film essentially taking place in Kadak, that we don't really get to see what is going on in the DC universe. We get to see Intergang, who are in the trailers, but for a movie that cost almost $200 million, it feels small. The effects on particular character shots are quite poor, and this has become a common criticism with most recent comic book films as of late. Marvel, DC, it seems to be affecting everybody, unfortunately, with less and less post-production time to finalize these shots. It's, without getting into specific plot details, it's unfortunate that what appears to be a major story point in the film is ultimately spoiled in the trailers. So if you don't want to know anything about the movie, then I would completely avoid the trailers, because a big reveal is told, I believe, in the first trailer that was released for the film. I'm disappointed. I know that I'm going to have some listeners who are going to suggest that I was not looking forward to the film, but regardless of the marketing material, I always want to go into a film and enjoy it. And I believe if you are able to ignore the problems that I've already stated, this could potentially be quite fun. If you are a fan of the Fast and Furious films, I am as well. They scratch a particular itch that I don't think a lot of other films do. But one of the key differences between a film like this and the Fast and Furious films is they've developed characters over time that you want to keep seeing the adventures that they are participating in. What hijinks, crazy heist, action, stunt, set piece that brings in the audience to gross almost $1 billion for the last 3 films. And Black Adam, unfortunately, isn't able to do that. I think there are a couple compelling characters with Hawkman, Dr. Fate, and Black Adam. But other than that, the villain is very cut and paste. While it's interesting to use a character that is not familiar to a lot of fans, I was not aware of this character before seeing the film and did a little bit of research into it afterwards. But ultimately, the film doesn't give a captivating end fight scene, which is the more depressing given the fact that you have an evil Shazam. This is not a spoiler because it does not happen in the film, but there is no references to Shazam. This is the same world. We do know that. There are things in the film to confirm that it is the same universe, and there are no references or potential teases whatsoever to a fight between the two characters, which would be why the reason why you are creating a Black Adam film to begin with, which is unfortunate because that's the fight that I want to see. If you've been following The Rock on social media, you may be aware of a different fight that he may be teasing, and I don't want to get into spoilers here in this portion of the review, but that is not a film that I am, quite frankly, interested in seeing. I would much rather see a Black Adam versus Shazam movie, particularly because I would love to see Dwayne as a villain up against Zachary Levi, who I thought did a phenomenal job as Shazam in the first Shazam, and I am looking forward to Shazam 2: Fury of the Gods. So it's unfortunate. I think it's not really crazy that there is such a separation between the audience and the critic score. I think if you are viewing this film critically, you may have similar issues than I had with it, but for a blockbuster that not requires, but certainly is enhanced by not thinking too much about it, this definitely could fit into a crowd-pleasing film, and it's clear to see given the box office success it had over opening weekend. What will be more interesting to see is if it is able to continue its success, or will word of mouth continue to lower that box office gross. I'm not really sure, but it will be something interesting to monitor in the upcoming weeks. So that will do it for my non-spoiler portion of the review. I'm going to jump into spoilers, so if you do not want to hear them, stop listening now. Spoilers for Black Adam. If you do not want the film ruined for you, this is an opportunity to stop listening to the show, and hopefully we'll see you next week. All right, we're into Black Adam spoilers. So we are introduced to Sabbac. The crown of Sabbac is ultimately built in the country of Kadak, which is part of ancient Egypt. And it is going to be used by the tyrannical king to bring the demon of Sabbac from hell forward and rule over the entire world. So the spoiler that was ruined in the trailers is that Black Adam, or Teth Adam, was not actually chosen to be the champion. It was his son, and his son ultimately gives the powers to The Rock, and then his son is killed. And this detail, not about who was necessarily being chosen, but this detail as to who was given this ability, or that, sorry, I'm frustrated by the fact that I knew this already based on the marketing material of the film, is that his son dies. And we are shown this in the marketing material, which is certainly weird, and I don't understand necessarily why they did that, but there it is. And it's kept from you for most of the film. We see the son chosen, and we see a vague silhouette of who his dad is, and his dad kind of looks like a skinny rock, which is certainly something I was not expecting to see, but there you go. And he doesn't believe that he deserves the powers because he believes they were supposed to be given to his son, because they were. And then it turns out that he wasn't captured, he was entombed. That's where he's found at the beginning of the film. So here's where I really want to break down my problems with the film. We are introduced to a Kadaki family who are supposed to be his almost tether to humanity. There is a boy who is the son of the archaeologist who discovers Black Adam, and he's supposed to be a stand-in for his son. And I just don't feel that they gave the young man, Amon, a opportunity to be successful in this role. The dialogue in this film is terrible. There is a henchman in this film that may be the worst actor ever in a comic book film, and it might come down to direction, the script, the choices that he made as a performer are, I don't think, work for this film at all. It felt like a cartoon, which when you were seeing something like this on the big live action stage doesn't really go over very well. My biggest problem with this film was how they handled Dr. Fate / Kent Nelson. If you are unaware of how this works, Kent Nelson is just a regular dude. He is not a being who is able to have any magical capabilities. He is an archaeologist who ultimately discovers the helmet of Dr. Fate, which is a helmet which contains the Lord of Order Nabu. And when a person puts on the helmet, Nabu takes over your body. All of the power is contained within that helmet. So if one is to remove the helmet, let's say you get a fancy super suit, it would disappear because the wearer is no longer given the ability to use such magic. An example would be Green Lantern, to my knowledge. Now, I have never seen this done in any version of the character. If the ring is off of Green Lantern cannot perform any of those powers. There are many examples in media where when the ring comes off Green Lantern, his suit disappears because the suit, in more modern versions anyways, is a construct of the costume. And that is a similar thing with Dr. Fate. There are examples of Dr. Fate using magic in this film. Actually, I shouldn't say Dr. Fate because it's not. It's Kent Nelson is using magic when not wearing the helmet, which is not how the canon of that character works at all. And it's especially frustrating because I think Pierce Brosnan, outside of The Rock, gives the best performance in the film. The way that they are able to build, with not a ton of screen time, this very compelling character who is a man who has lived for nearly a century as this character, what he's witnessed, what he's experienced, the friendships that he has developed, was really, really interesting. Almost this, not man out of time, but this man who has just experienced a near century of human beings, chaos, whatever he may have experienced, and his particular friendship with Carter Hall, aka Hawkman, being one of the main things that is worth caring about ultimately in this film. And when it comes to using magic, one unfortunate aspect of this film is one of the biggest twists is it what appears to be a near death, or appears to be the death of Hawkman, which would be an incredible, shocking moment. It turns out to be a trick, and that Hawkman, just by touching the helmet, is able to create illusion holograms of himself. Which, again, I understand not wanting to put Hawkman in the Dr. Fate helmet, I guess, but it does not work narratively given how this character functions. He says, "Oh, it's a trick I learned." I don't know how you would have learned that trick unless you also went inside the helmet with Dr. Fate. Like, I understand that some may say I'm overthinking the magic of Dr. Fate, but when every version that I have seen, particularly in animation, because that has been one of the major, at times the character has been brought to non-comic book pages. He did show up in, I believe, Smallville season 9. But other than that, Dr. Fate does not get a lot of play. And every version that I have seen functions in this way, which is frustrating given how the character is really interesting. The design of the costume and helmet is really cool. It did frustrate me. It may sound like a nitpick, but that it didn't have any eyes, given that typically the Dr. Fate helmet does have glowing eyes. I would have preferred to hear... We do hear a little bit of Nabooie, not the planet from Star Wars, but a little bit of voice effects done to Pierce Brosnan's voice. Like I said earlier, I think Aldous Hodge is really cool in this character. We do see him wielding the mace for quite a bit, which is cool, but again, any version of Hawkman that I've seen, he's wielding an axe. And the movie makes this big point of him switching to an axe, which I understand as a comic book fan, but we have no mention in this film of Shiera at all, which would maybe explain why he's using the axe. Maybe she's not in the picture. Maybe she had passed away. Who knows? We do see that Pierce Brosnan's Kent Nelson can see the future, but a potential future, and that he wants to avoid, which doesn't really make sense as to why he would eventually have Black Adam get rid of his powers, or say Shazam, which removes his powers, get taken over by Task Force X, where the JSA are working with them. Which again, I don't need everything explained, but given how the DC universe has not really had a cohesive narrative, it is especially confusing given all the different parts we've seen, but none of it seems to mesh well together because DC had a person that they wanted to make films with, and then they decided they didn't, and then we've just sort of gotten hodgepodge films thrown together ever since. And then the occasional television series, which is frustrating because I don't want something that is exactly the same as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It would actually be better if the DC Extended Universe was able to do something different, and it would be really interesting if you had a version of the Shazam-averse / Black Adam-averse moving forward, but ultimately this film doesn't give a tease to that. We're in full spoilers, so I'm going to say it. This happened today, date of recording, officially announced that Henry Cavill is coming back as Superman, and he is teased in the post-credit scene. Apparently, he's friends now with Amanda Waller. She calls in a favor, and he says that the world hasn't been as scared in a long time, but that he's bringing up red flags there in Kadak about his power level. Which, and again, a fight between Black Adam and Superman would be cool. Ultimately, I don't believe Superman would be able to stand a chance, given how typically he has a weakness for magic. There is a famous short that has Shazam versus Black Adam with Superman involved. That's quite great. I believe it's only about 15 minutes long, but it's worth, I believe the whole thing's on YouTube if you want to check that out, because ultimately Shazam wins that fight. Shazam is the hero between Black Adam and himself. And so what I find frustrating when it comes to the expanded roster of the JSA in this film is that they introduce Atom Smasher and Cyclone, who are very low characters in terms of the significance to the DC universe, and it feels like they were able to be in the film because DC doesn't care what you do with them. And I wish the film did do something interesting with them. There's like this friendship between the two of them, and Atom Smasher is played off to be like, oh, I'm not really aware of my powers, but that's pretty much it. They don't do anything compelling with them. I think it would have been more interesting if instead of Cyclone or Atom Smasher, you had Zatanna, who is a magic user and has been known to use the helmet of Naboo, if she was involved, because then you can build in a mentor-mentee relationship between Kent Nelson, who has had friendships with Zatara, who is Zatanna's father. I think that would have been significantly more interesting and would have been a way of getting around somebody else using the Dr. Fate helmet. I know it may sound like I'm sticking on this, but it be given the fact that we have several shots where Pierce Brosnan takes off the helmet and you get to see his amazing CGI suit on him, which is a great segue to the skinny Rock that we get to see before he has the powers. Now, he's not skinny Steve like Steve Rogers from the first two Captain America films, but they definitely reduce him down, and the head replacement is okay, but it does, I believe, fall a little bit into that uncanny valley where you know something is wrong, but you're not necessarily sure what is wrong. And I found that funny because we do see it more than once in the film. I think it is really cool that he does build this relationship with Amon, who ultimately gets him to decide to be like less evil, but he's still ultimately at the end of the day evil. The villain is played in this by Marwan Kanzari, who, if you are a fan of the live action Disney films, he played Jafar in it. And I had a very hard time while watching this film remembering where I had seen him from, and had to look it up when I got home because he's got a very, very distinct voice. And he's evil from the get-go. We see that he is friends with Amon's mom, and it's carbon copy, oh, this guy was your friend, but actually he's a bad guy. This film follows very, very common archetypes from other films, and unfortunately it doesn't do anything interesting with them or make anything new of it to be compelling. It feels very cut and paste, and at the end of the day it's really unfortunate because I would have loved to be able to sit and just enjoy my popcorn and watch this film, but there were so many red flags throughout the experience, whether that was music choice, editing choice, unfinished visual effects. I mean, The Rock is entertaining, he is, and I know people are being critical of the fact that like this isn't The Rock that we're used to, which is dumb given the fact that he is playing a villain / anti-hero in this. He's not the hero, which fortunately is one of the best parts of the film, but I would recommend this if you are looking forward to a big blockbuster with some fun visuals, but other than that, unfortunately, I don't think it brings anything new to the table, except for the fact that we finally have it, and maybe we'll get a Shazam versus Black Adam movie. And it is great to see Henry Cavill back in the suit and with hair curl, which is something we did not get when he was in the Zack Snyder trilogy of films and the theatrical cut of Justice League, which Joss Whedon technically made. But that does it for Black Adam. If you are interested in seeing it, let me know what your opinion is. You can tweet at me at Kyle_Naranya, or you can tweet at Film Realists. Next week will be a season 1 review of House of the Dragon. I'll see you next time.